said you know how you want to start in, so whenever you want to start in, just start in that way.
So I have a mildly upsetting tangent to start with.
Have I heard this?
No.
Is this new?
This is new.
You've been saving this for me for several days?
No, just
or
like an hour.
This just happened?
Just an hour.
Oh, okay.
So I was listening. Sorry, I've hyped this up more than I needed to. I was listening to a podcast earlier, and the narrator started with, "No, I just want to explain what this time was like for the younger crowd," and I thought he was going to explain something from like the 50s, the 60s.
Okay.
And then he proceeded to explain the 90s. He proceeded to explain the 90s and what it was like to wait each week for television to come out. And then he was like, and then you watched MTV and you saw music videos, but it was like all your friends were watching the same music videos at the same time. It was like YouTube, but you were all in it together. I felt really old. Someone was explaining my childhood to me, but not to me. It was weird. And apparently I am now an old.
Oh no.
So yes, that is my upsetting story that I needed to start with.
Oh no, that's big spooky. And how's it going to get more spooky than that?
Oh, it will.
Oh, it will?
It will.
It's more spooky than the endless march of time into oblivion.
No, it's not. Never mind. Thank you. That is all. Good night.
Oh dear.
Anyways, that is the thing that has upset me today.
Oh dear, no, that is spooky. That is spooky, and it's also history.
My childhood is now a part of history.
There you go. That's our new topic every week, is just talk about how everything from childhood is now history, and it will be spooky to think about.
Yes, it's very creepy, because we are old, apparently. Anyways, how are you?
I'm feeling weird.
That's what I said last time.
Mm-hmm. Not because it's spooky season, though, just because we're a little bit closer to the table behind us in our setup today, and I feel like if I move my arms in any direction, I'm going to knock something over. I have my arms very close to myself. It's the same sort of body position that I have when I'm in the shower, because if I turn like 90 degrees in any direction in the shower, I will knock all the shower bottles, shampoo bottles, to the floor, and it will be very loud, and one of them will hit my toe, and I will shout.
Which is always very startling.
But today is episode 4.
Mm-hmm.
This is our first episode after I spent last week editing myself and hearing myself talk, which is a new thing for me because I don't usually do that. I don't usually act. I don't usually record myself. So I'm very used to hearing you recorded, but I'm not used to hearing myself recorded. And I heard myself say, so many times it was frustrating.
Sorry. Yeah, I'm used to editing myself on video, so I'm used to watching myself make just the most ridiculous faces. And yeah, I just walk away hating my face, that's all. So I understand, and I'm sorry. I think it's a natural response.
Luckily, I didn't have to look at my face. I did have to hear myself stutter. I didn't realize how much that I stuttered until I listened back to myself, and I came to the realization that there is a cadence to my voice, and it is a whole bunch of me stuttering and saying, a lot.
Okay, I've listened to you talk for a long time, and I really don't hear you stutter very much.
Huh.
10 years. I can say it now that I have officially listened to you talk for 10 years because last week was the 10-year anniversary of the day we met, side note. So I've listened to you talk for 10 years and I have noticed very little stuttering.
On the day that we released all 3 of our first 3 episodes.
Yes, we released our first 3 episodes and officially became a podcast on our 10-year anniversary because I have a weird thing about dates and numbers. Hopefully it is a lucky number.
Yes, we got a little bit of feedback. We're still kind of trying to expand our reach and who's listening, because obviously this just got uploaded a week ago. But we heard some good feedback, a lot of positive things, and, well, I'd like to say thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. I hope you will tell your friends and write us a review and subscribe and all that good stuff. My favorite was hearing how people pronounce the name, because it is a made-up word. My friend Katie was pronouncing it as like spooky history. Spooky history. She typed it out phonetically for me, but I don't know that I can actually say it.
I think that's the way I tried to pronounce it.
Yeah.
Once, too.
I don't know. It's a made up word. Pronounce it how you will.
How do you pronounce it?
I don't know, because I designed it to look good, and I did not think one bit about how to actually say it out loud.
Because if you look at it, it could also look like Spooky Story.
Yes, well, I did that on purpose, because like it's a play on spooky story and spooky history to combine the two elements of the podcast. But I didn't think of how to actually pronounce it, so pronounce it however you want, basically. Spooky story.
Spooky Story. Spooky Story.
Spook story.
Since you made the two O's a ghost on the logo, maybe it's just SpookiStory without any O sound. Just SpookiStory.
The podcast title is...
Before we get started, when we ended episode 3, and we were talking about bridges, and we were talking about bridge ghost stories, and I mentioned Legend of Sleepy Hollow and the bridge, I did a little more research into that, and I found an example of the bridge at the time that the story would have been written.
Okay, so in that, did he have to cross the bridge to get away from the Headless Horseman?
So the end of the story is, spoiler alert, for everyone who doesn't know the story. He was trying to escape the Headless Horseman. He was crossing the bridge. His head was struck, and that is where that he disappears. Either he fell into the river, or he fled back to Connecticut, or, as the old Dutch wives say in the town, he was spirited away by supernatural means.
That is a wordy euphemism.
But yeah, there's been several bridges near the cemetery in Sleepy Hollow across the river, and this wooden one here would have been the one that existed at the time that Irving was writing the story.
Okay, that is a precarious looking bridge. It's just a bunch of planks, basically. It's plywood just stapled together.
We'll try to find a way to upload this picture so that the world can see and know.
You can find it on Instagram.
But yeah, there's been several bridges there over the years. Oddly enough, though, there has never been a covered bridge over that location, even though a lot of times when I imagine the bridge or when I saw the story told in some visual format, the bridge was usually a covered bridge. However, there's never been a covered bridge there at that crossing. Currently, there is a 4-lane highway. It's US Route 9.
Sexy.
Yes, it's a concrete bridge.
Cute. Super cute. Okay.
But yeah, you can actually go there today by the cemetery, and there's an older bridge still that you can go and take a selfie at. So
excellent. What if I want to take a bridge? What if I want to take a selfie with the 4-lane highway?
It sounds like people drive quite fast along that road, and it might be hazardous.
Okay. I live for danger.
Anyway, so this time you were going to start off again after I started off last time, right?
I can.
I'm comfortable with that format.
Okay.
It seems to work fairly well. We can try switching it back again eventually and figure out what works, but...
Let us know. Let us know what you like.
Yeah, let us know what
Tell
you like.
us. If you want to just sit here and talk about our cat for 2 hours, we can do that too.
There is an odd noise in the background. I don't know if it's going to pick up on the microphone, but it is the cat currently walking on something in the other room.
It sounds like she is walking across the glass tabletop, because that's a good place for her.
That's what it sounded like to me, too.
To see Minerva the cat, also visit Instagram. Okay, so am I going first?
Yeah.
All right.
You go first this
You
time.
already told. So our theme for this week was the Northeast.
The
New England?
Northeast, Connecticut was kind of how it segued.
That general area.
Ichabod Crane, the man from Connecticut, crossed a bridge in a ghost story, and now
so it all ties together.
It all ties together.
All right. So yes, we picked this one specifically because I wanted to tell this story, which horrified me as a child. So the story, I'll just say it. The story I'm going to do tonight is the Snedeker Family Haunting.
Say that again?
The Snedeker Family Haunting.
Snedeker.
Snedeker.
Like Snedeker or just S-N-E?
S-N-E.
Snedeker. Okay.
Snedeker.
Okay.
It is more popularly known as the Haunting in Connecticut. So I first learned about this one when I was way too young. Most people are like, horrified by Blair Witch Project or something, or like Chainsaw Massacre or something when they're a kid. No, I was traumatized by the pilot episode of A Haunting on Discovery Channel. So this aired in 2002 and was also called A Haunting in Connecticut, which apparently a filmmaker saw and was similarly traumatized, and then went on to make A Haunting in Connecticut, which was released in theaters in 2009. It was produced by Gold Circle Films.
Hang on for just one second.
There's a cat scratching.
Madam.
Little ferret.
Little bad ferret.
Come here. Stop. Stop scratching the backdrop. Do not attack me.
Bad ferret. My goodness, you are so cute and you're so misbehaved. I'm sorry.
Cut out all the horrifying scratching. In case that scratching cannot be cut out, that was the cat clawing at the backdrop. Sorry. So, in episode 1, we talked about stories from unreliable narrators and how stories change over time depending on who's telling them to fit the needs of the narrator. This story is wild, and it varies totally depending on who is telling it.
Okay.
A lot of the people involved were under 18 at the time of the story, so their names were changed.
But of course they must be well over 18 by now.
Yes, now they are. But they don't talk about it. So I'm going to go with the version of events that I found to be most common, and then if there's something that comes up that I saw in other places that is worth mentioning, I will mention it, and then you can discern from it what you will.
Okay.
This is a very dark, heavy story, so trigger warning. We are going to be discussing some traumatic things like cancer, specifically childhood cancer, financial difficulties, mental illness. There's a brief mention of like drug abuse and alcoholism. The big one in this story is sexual assault. So yeah, that's not your thing. You can go ahead and skip to the history part of this episode.
Sometimes I worry that my sections might even be. Maybe I should start giving content warnings at the start of mine too. Some of mine go in rather dark places.
It's true. All of it's dark. Never mind. Never mind. I can't help you. This story begins in 1986 when the Snedeker family moves to Southington, Connecticut, to be closer to their eldest son's doctors. Their oldest son, Philip, was 13 when he was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma. According to some sources, this was very advanced and he was given 6 months to live without drastic intervention. So instead of driving from upstate New York, the family decided to be closer to his doctors at Yukon Hospital.
Okay.
Alan and Carmen Snedeker decided to move their 3 sons and 1 daughter. This is another thing that just varies wildly from source to source, is the number of children.
Okay.
Some sources mention only 3 sons. Some sources mention 3 sons and a daughter. Some sources mention 3 sons, 1 daughter, 1 niece. Sometimes it's 3 sons, 1 daughter, and 2 nieces. Sometimes the nieces arrive later in the story. There's no consistency to that one, and none of these children want to talk about this now. So
these multiple nieci, if you will, they move to Connecticut with the family?
That's what I'm really confused about. In some versions, yes, these 2 nieces were already living with them and move with them, and then in other versions they show up in the story later, and in other versions there's 2 of them, and sometimes there's just 1.
Okay.
So I don't know.
Okay. I
don't know what really happened. This is just how it gets spun. The way that I found this most consistent is they show up later. That's the version that I'm gonna tell.
Okay.
Again, I wasn't there. I don't know what really happened, and there's no consistency. So that is what we're working with.
Okay. I'm gonna stop right quick. I'm gonna mention the fact that our little cat is much in the other room. Do you think that's going to pick up?
I don't know. She's so quiet all day, and then as soon as we do this, she's all over the place.
Well,
should we pause until she gets done eating?
No, let's just keep going for now. I think she was eating in one of the others, and I ended up not really picking it up too much.
They were struggling to find a rental property that was within their budget, that was also large enough for their family, because no matter which one of these numbers is true, they had a lot of children that they had to house.
Yeah.
And at this point, they're struggling with medical bills. But they did finally find something in their price range, which was a colonial-style home that was only a few minutes from the hospital. To make the property work, they had to convert the basement into a bedroom for their 2 oldest boys. This is where the names get confusing, because in some sources, the oldest son, who is 13, is named Stephen, and in some sources, he is Philip. I most often found Philip.
Okay.
And then...
The oldest one is the one who has Hodgkin's lymphoma, right?
Yes.
Okay. And you said not non-Hodgkin's, he has
Hodgkin's lymphoma.
Hodgkin's lymphoma.
I will be, for the purposes of this story, I will be calling him Philip. And then the 11-year-old brother, who was the second oldest in the family, I'll be calling him Bradley. That's what I found most often.
I guess before we go any further, did you know what the niece was called? And you said there was a sister.
I don't know the sister's name.
Okay.
The nieces, and they're not going to show up for a couple pages. At some points, there's a niece named Tammy, and at some points, there's a niece named Kelly.
Okay. So Philip, Bradley, an unnamed sister, Tammy, and Kelly.
And then one more brother who's never mentioned.
And a littlest brother.
He's there. No, I think
okay.
It's very... I think the parents, when they retold this story, tried to keep the kids out of it to protect their identities, and as adults, the children have chosen not to come forward, so there is not that much reliable information because they don't want to be named.
Okay.
Philip and Bradley are the ones who show up most often, and those are the names that we will be calling them today.
Okay.
So they plan to put Philip and Bradley in the basement bedrooms while the 2 youngest children and the parents lived in the upstairs bedrooms. So it starts off bad just from the beginning. So while they're moving in, the parents, Alan and Carmen, discover embalming equipment, tables, medical tools, and a freezer in the basement while they're trying to convert it.
Yeah.
They also find a chain and pulley system that is meant for moving bodies that goes from the basement up to what they're going to be using as the master bedroom. There's also a blood drain, which is fun.
Ew.
So the rent is so low on this property because this was formerly a funeral home, known as Hallahan Funeral Home.
Ew.
They also found photographs, toe tags, and the personal effects of the dead. So not great.
No, the
not a good
weird
start.
stuff that you find in rental homes.
It's just not what I would be expecting to find.
Like the bicycles that are in the basement here,
Oh, I
and just the
forgot about
random
those.
odds and ends that are underneath the house we're in right now. Like,
That's true. There's just 100 years worth of random stuff in the basement here.
sometimes I wonder who rode that bike.
Okay, thank you for that. I hope they're very happy. Because the family didn't have the financial means to move anywhere else, they decided to lie to the children and hide the house's history from them, especially Philip, because while he was confronting this illness at such a young age, they did not want him to know he was moving into a funeral home.
Fair.
Yeah, except the very first time that Philip ever went into the home, he came straight to his mother and said that the house was evil and that they could not live there.
Oh.
Yeah, which she kind of dismissed and said, "Oh no, my son is so close to death that he can sense that this is a funeral home." Which I don't know.
That's wild.
I don't know. It's just such an awful position to be in, like, when this is where you have to put your family, this is the environment you have to put your family in, and also your child is like, hey, this house is evil.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's all bad, and it's all downhill from here.
Especially when it's like the sick one that you're trying to take care of.
To like protect from this reality. It's so bad. So Carmen moves the kids to Connecticut while Alan is still in New York on weekdays because he's waiting for his company to transfer him. So she's trying to run the household, move in, and take care of all her children who are 13 and under.
Somewhere between 5 and 6 based on how many nisi are present.
Yes.
Okay.
There's
just
a
making
very
sure I've
number
got
of children.
There are so many in this. I'm just trying to make sure that I have it correct.
That's fair, because the more you look into this story, just the more it evolves, and just, again, depending on who's telling it and for what purposes they're telling it, it changes. The youngest daughter, who, again, is unnamed, is playing in her bedroom when she sees a woman in the room with her. So she runs to her mother and tells her that there's a woman in her room with her. So at this point, Carmen is like, okay, the kids found out that it was a funeral home and now they're spooked. So she doesn't know who told them or how they figured it out, but they know. And she dismisses it, saying that, you know, they're working themselves up. They're just scaring themselves with the house's history, and that, like, the older boys have said something to mess with her.
Yeah. Philip
and Bradley made their bedroom the room that would have been the casket display room when it was a funeral home.
Like the viewing room?
That's how I took it.
When you say casket display, I guess it's either like, see, me not being a mortician, I'm thinking, could that either be the room where the family chooses the casket, or is that the room where the casket is displayed during the viewing?
I really don't know.
Okay.
There was an interview that said that their dining room was formerly the chapel.
Ooh.
The layout of this house is incredible.
I mean, yeah, it sounds like you're essentially moving into a commercial building.
Yeah, with, you know, metal gurneys and embalming equipment and a blood drain.
Yeah.
It's all bad. Philip and Bradley start to complain that they see a man with long black hair and black eyes pacing around in the embalming room. And again, they go to tell their mom, and she's like, you're just, like, scaring yourselves because this is a funeral home, and also you're sleeping next to the embalming room. In the 2002 documentary on Discovery Channel, the actress is just like, well, he better start paying rent.
About the sick kid?
No, about the man with long black hair and black eyes.
Oh, about Ghost
about
Man.
The ghost. No, not the 13-year-old. Sorry.
Sometimes parents do say that to their kids.
That's true. But no, in this case, she was like, well, if we've got a ghost, he better pay rent. Which, fair. Again, that was just the dramatization. I don't know if that's true.
And then suddenly, without explanation, they just start finding quarters all over the house in random places.
That sounds fine.
They wake up in the morning and they think that their child has pranked them. They say, why is there a quarter on each one of my eyes when I woke up this morning?
Oh, quarters are so dirty. You get an eye infection.
I have pink eye after I moved into this house.
Ugh. The second youngest brother is actually interviewed in the... Everyone in the 2002 interview is interviewed anonymously, so it's got that, like, backlighting, witness protection thing going on.
Does it have distorted voices?
No, it does not.
Oh.
It's not quite that upsetting. But the brother Bradley is interviewed in that one, and he's quoted saying that while you're in the house, you would hear a deep voice calling for Philip, and you'd see things. And at this point, all of the children were seeing things, hearing things, and randomly smelling rotting flesh.
Ew.
And they are regularly seeing the man with long black hair and a man with white hair in a pinstripe suit.
If it was a morgue and kids were complaining about hearing rotting flesh, I'd be very concerned that maybe not everyone who came in had left.
Ew. I didn't see the 2009 movie, but I think there's a part in it where they like uncover bodies in the wall or something, which didn't happen like in the
Ew.
theoretically real events of this story, but
Ugh.
Hollywood added
Ugh.
bodies in the wall,
Ugh.
which no. Their mom Carmen does not believe them, still thinks that they're just spooking themselves because of the home's history, and she says she was raised Catholic and doesn't believe that the spirit world can interact with our world. So both her and Alan are completely dismissing the children. She starts to think that the cancer treatments are causing hallucinations in Philip, which is spreading to the other children. As he's seeing things, he's telling the other kids about it and scaring them. So she asks Philip's doctors about the medications and if there are any side effects that would cause hallucinations. And the doctor says that is not a side effect of anything that he is taking. That's not anything that they have heard of. So that's when they start to worry that on top of the cancer, Philip has a psychological problem. Meanwhile, Philip and Bradley are still seeing and hearing things in the basement every night, and they are consistently waking up their parents to tell them that someone is in the basement, but by the time the parents get there, there is no one there. One night, they check all the windows and doors, make sure everything is locked. It snowed, so they go check for footprints in the snow, and they're trying to prove to the children that no one was able to get in and out of the house, and they just start scolding them for waking them up every night. Now that they realize that their parents aren't going to be any help with this, the boys start leaving the lights on every night, and that's the only way they can sleep, because they say that that keeps them away.
Okay.
But of course, that means that the electric bill goes up. And the family is already deep in debt with medical bills because cancer is fucking expensive.
Yeah.
In true dad fashion, Alan takes all their light bulbs. So he just takes all the light bulbs out of the basement. It's horrifying. Like, at any time when there's no light in the basement, it sounds terrifying. But when it's your bedroom, that's the place in the house that you want there to be light.
I wish the parents would be like, if the parents are so brave, why don't they sleep in the basement?
That's right, trade bedrooms. I will sleep at the top of the blood drain and you sleep at the bottom.
Yeah, it's not like that this is their house that they designed with a master bedroom or something to where that this is clearly the parents' bedroom. No, this is a funeral home.
Their dining room table's in a chapel.
Yeah, put the dining room table in put the room that you use the least in that, and then sleep in the chapel.
Has anyone considered just sleeping in the kitchen? The next part is told in the 2002 interview with the little brother, Bradley. So one night after the light bulbs have been removed, the boys wake up to their little sister turning the lights on and off, even when there are no light bulbs.
Ew.
So he recounts that he chases her up the stairs and starts asking his parents, where is she? She just came this way. And they're like, no, she's been asleep in her room for hours.
Uh-huh.
In fact, she is asleep in her room, but either way, she shouldn't be able to make lights come on and off when there are no lights.
Mm-hmm.
Which means whatever is in this house is capable of mimicking them. So, do you remember the Doppelganger Phenomenon from Waverly Hills?
Yeah.
So now we've got doppelgangers.
Whatever's here can also apparently just generate light.
Yeah, like it's a good conductor of electricity. You know, very eco-friendly.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking right there.
Typically, a doppelganger phenomenon is attributed to darker hauntings and considered to be harbingers of darkness, but we don't really know. They're attributed to many different kinds of hauntings, poltergeist and demonic, but we don't really know what they are. Either way, I hate it. One of my least favorites.
I guess, in a way, they're kind of like mirrors.
That's a whole other thing.
They don't know if they're dark or what, but if they can reflect back or refract, then...
So creepy. I don't like it. Minerva's burrowing into your Adidas jacket right now.
I just washed that.
I don't know what she's doing. I've never seen a cat work so hard to get underneath blankets.
I might actually step away for just a second.
Yeah, you should take that away from her because she seems confused.
They're there.
Now Minerva's here. She's being held like a baby while I tell this horrifying story. Okay.
She'll keep me safe. But she's the same color as the curtain behind us.
She does. Now you're just disappearing into the backdrop.
Oh, she purrs. Sorry, keep going.
While all of this is happening and the parents are dismissing them, Philip is still hearing something calling his name. And the family starts noticing him pulling away, getting angrier and moodier. He doesn't hang out with his little brother as much. He starts wearing dark clothing. One of the articles is like, he's wearing leather.
Or just parents giving him leather jackets to wear?
I don't know what that's about. That was a weird... I found that in one source, and I just thought that was really funny. It's just like, he's wearing leather.
He is...
I'm like, these people could only afford to live in a funeral home, but their child is wearing leather. Okay.
He's also a teenager, so the dark clothes, that's just par for the course.
Yeah, in the... Again, in the 2002 documentary, which is just burned into my brain, so I'm just going to keep referencing it. They have a part where he's just down there just listening to heavy metal music. Just wearing a black t-shirt. It's like, he's 14. He's going through his goth phase. Calm down. Chill. However, Philip does take it a step farther because he starts writing some pretty dark poetry about necrophilia.
Ew.
Yeah, so he takes it one too far, 3 or 4 too far, way too far. So while his mood is getting darker and darker, his physical health is actually getting better because his cancer actually goes into remission at this point, which should be a really happy thing, but it doesn't seem to affect him in that way. Which again, the psychology of dealing with cancer, especially at such a young age, that has a wild effect.
Just because the cancer starts going away doesn't mean that
it's still a traumatic event, and the trauma of that takes a long time to heal.
One just starts feeling better right away. No.
Yeah. Especially, he's very young. Like, he's already, like, that's a ridiculous, traumatizing age to begin with, and he's gone through something that no one should have to go through.
Yeah, and the experience is already isolating him from his peers to begin with.
Everyone who always tells this story talks like, oh, he should be really happy because this happened, but no, that's not really how
people love to do that when they tell stories. They always think, oh, this person who's had an experience I've never had, they should feel this way because I imagine I can feel that way and I have empathy, so I know exactly how other people feel, but that's not how the human mind works.
Yeah.
The human mind is not required to act according to our preconceived notions of how it should behave.
Yeah, so I think, it's fair for him to still be dealing with the trauma of that experience.
Yeah.
And he has license to not suddenly just be okay, because when that happens, you aren't suddenly okay.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a positivity that's gone in a toxic direction.
Yeah. However, if he was really writing dark poetry about necrophilia, that's a different problem. That's a whole other... Philip's got a lot going on. That's problematic and should have been addressed.
Yeah.
So this is where all the sources seem to agree that the nieces are now involved in the story. Again, I don't know if there are 2 nieces. Some nieces, sometimes they're referred to as Tammy, and sometimes she's referred to as Kelly. Sometimes they're both there. Sometimes just one of them is there.
I guess it's even possible one could have been the niece and one could have been the unnamed sister.
Yeah, that's possible.
And they could be getting lumped together.
So what I found is that a 17-year-old niece named Tammy moves in with the Snedekers while her parents are going through a divorce.
Oh, so they're older.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, no, Tammy's older. I believe Kelly would have been 12.
Okay.
This is where it gets very murky.
Okay.
Tammy says that she had been previously very close with Paul and immediately notices that he has become very withdrawn. She said that he went from being a really sweet kid to being very angry.
I'm sorry, did you say Paul?
I'm so sorry. Paul, I'm sorry, I messed up in my notes. Paul was what he was called in the 2002 documentary.
Philip.
I mean Philip. If I say Paul, I mean Philip, and this is why I'm confused.
Okay. Also Stephen.
Yes, also Stephen.
So Philip Paul Stephen.
Philip Paul Stephen Snedeker.
What a name.
Dude. She said that he went from being a really sweet kid to being very angry. He tells her about the voices and apparitions, and he also tells her that there's a figure at the end of his bed every night telling him to hurt his family. Yeah, it's just all bad. Tammy immediately tells Carmen what Philip is saying. This is where sources can't seem to agree on what exactly happened.
Okay.
The things that we do know, Philip attacks Tammy. According to some sources, this is a sexual assault. According to other sources, this happens more than once.
How long have they been in I'm just curious, how old is Philip now at this time? You said they moved him when he was 13.
I believe at this point they've been in the house about a year.
Okay, so he's still a fair bit younger than, like,
yeah,
this isn't like
he would be
several
14,
years later.
yeah.
Okay.
The whole time the story takes place, he would be between 13 and 15.
Okay.
And some sources want to gloss over the sexual assault part of this story.
Okay.
And ignore and just never mention it.
Uh-huh.
But again, there was never... I could not find anywhere where a charge was leveled against him either. So legally, I think I have to say allegedly.
Yeah. Okay, allegedly, yeah.
Anyways, the consensus is, at this point, he is taken away from the house.
Okay.
His mother repeatedly says they called an ambulance and he was taken away in an ambulance.
Okay.
Other sources say he was arrested at this point.
Okay.
Either way, he was committed for 45 days and diagnosed with schizophrenia.
Okay.
When he's taken away, he tells his parents that things in the house will get worse now that he is gone. And this is when things do start to escalate and when the rest of the family starts to experience the haunting. Carmen recounts that one time when she was taking a shower, the shower curtain wrapped itself around her like it was trying to suffocate her. And she couldn't get out until her niece heard her and came and pulled it off of her. Another time, Carmen was mopping the floor and the water that she was mopping with turned blood red. She said, the mop water was going blood red. I mean, a deep, deep red. It made my skin crawl. I started getting nervous that I was ruining the floor. Which, weird priorities. But I mean, it is a rental.
Yeah. Yep. That security deposit is something.
Things in the house also start to move around. Carmen would set the table and turn around to find out that all the dishes were back in the cabinet. She would hear her children calling her from different rooms that they weren't in. Bradley says at this point he starts hearing Philip's voice calling him from the basement. And as they sleep, they start noticing that the mattresses are moving as if they're breathing.
And this is within a 45-day period after...
Yes, if it is to believe that he was committed for 45 days, then yes, this would have been within 45 days.
Then.
Yes.
Okay.
This is another part that people gloss over a lot, but I want to make sure I tell correctly. So this is when it seems like whatever is in the house is focusing its attention on Tammy or one of the nieces. One night she's lying in bed and she sees hands moving under her blankets and a dark shadow over her.
Ugh.
Yeah. Ugh. So she can feel something like on her and she's clutching her rosary and she can feel something like trying to peel her fingers away from the rosary. No, I hate it. So she runs to Carmen for help, and Carmen is quoted as seeing that she saw imprints of a hand under Tammy's nightshirt, like something was grabbing at her. Alan and Carmen also went on record in an interview in the 80s, which is one of the more wild things I've ever seen, to say that they were also sexually assaulted by an unseen force, which is now incubus/succubus territory, which is... Can I say on YouTube?
We did. Yeah, we can.
I didn't know if it was one of the words we weren't allowed to say.
Put this little cat down. My goodness, you are aggressively purring into me. You are being so... she's not letting go of me. Like, I can't...
Oh, she's, like, nuzzled in.
Yeah, she's not letting go.
Honey.
Hey, girl. I guess you can stay here, then.
No, she does not want to. It's okay, little miss.
This happened after they had their son committed, or it was happening throughout?
I believe after he was committed. Again, different reports vary. They did talk about this on a talk show in the 80s. On the Sally Jesse Raphael show. They got interviewed about it, and then I guess some producer or somebody decided that it would be a really good idea for them to bring a bed on stage and for the couple to get in the bed and then tell the audience what happened, which is...
Wow.
Does not compute.
Wow.
Does not
No.
compute.
I can't say okay. I can only say not okay. I wouldn't want to watch that as an audience member either.
Well,
I don't understand.
I don't.
Draw.
I don't know. I don't know. Anyway, incubus, succubus are believed to be a demonic presence or a demon. Basically they're rape demons.
Yeah.
I hate it. I will go ahead and say that this right here is enough for me to just want none of the paranormal to be real, because I don't want that. Don't want that to be real. I hate it. We are done with that part of the story, if that's a big trigger. I'm relieved we are done with that part of the story, because I hate it. So it's also during this period of escalation when the entity appears to be able to follow them out of the house. So now they're saying that things will happen to them even when they're not in the former funeral home. Once, while Alan was out, his truck started itself and accelerated into a building. So whatever is there is attached to them. It's not attached to the house.
With him in it? Or
I don't
did he just, like,
know.
step out of the car and, like, it just took off?
I don't know, actually.
mean,
Again, the sources vary so wildly that you get these little bits and pieces that are very consistent, and then others that are just like, it's like half a story. You keep getting half of the story.
Yeah.
So at this point, they're thinking there is no point for them to move because it's going to come with them. So this is where I think everyone starts to assume that it's something demonic, because it's not attached to a place, it's attached to the people.
Okay.
So the family's afraid to go to sleep because they're not safe anywhere, and if they do go to sleep, terrible things happen to them. So they call their priest for help, who comes over, listens to their stories, and then tells them to ignore it and it'll go away. She's also every single one of my teachers about every single bully I ever had. So, cool.
That's like the response anyone gives when they're just like, I don't want to deal with this.
I don't feel like it.
That's also the response the parents gave to their kid, and now their kid's locked up in an asylum.
Huh.
Told their kid to ignore it, and then their kid got, like, possessed by this thing and, like, attacked their niece, like.
So this is where Ed and Lorraine Warren enter our story.
Huh, they're in this?
They are in this. This is an Ed and Lorraine Warren case. Surprise!
Huh.
They're here. The cavalry has arrived. If you are not familiar with them, the Warrens are famed demonologists who founded the New England Society for Psychic Research. They investigated 10,000 paranormal cases, including the Amityville haunting, the Enfield poltergeist, and the Annabelle doll. According to Lorraine, she has the gift of discernment and she can detect entities. As soon as Lorraine entered the basement, she said that the infestation was very bad, and they began to speculate whether or not there was a doorway to hell in the basement, where entities are just like walking on through or something. Maybe? I don't know. So while the Warrens are investigating the property, they claim that they found that one of the former employees of the funeral home had been practicing necromancy, and in doing so had infused the home with a deep evil.
That's a crazy thing to find out.
I don't know how they got this information, but this is the information that they claim to have uncovered.
Okay.
So they conclude they need the Catholic Church to sanction an exorcism. The type of exorcism that they need is very rare. Most people think of people being possessed and in need of an exorcism, but in this case, the Warrens believed that the location itself was infected with a demonic presence. So their research team now moves into the house to collect evidence on the haunting. Guess how long they stay there for?
3 hours.
The Warrens' investigative team moves in with the Snedekers for 9.5 weeks.
What? Are they in the basement? Are they staying the night in the basement?
They moved in with them for 9 weeks.
7 times 9 is 49. 49 days.
I'm just like, were y'all like, did y'all just need a place to live for a little while you're waited for your next lease to start? What is going on?
The mystery machine had broken down.
While they're there trying to collect evidence, they have everyone move into the living room so that the entity cannot isolate and attack them, claiming that the entity will now pick the next vulnerable family member. On one occasion, Carmen went into a trance-like state, and she says she remembers just feeling nothingness, just everything sort of going blank. Everyone else in the room, in the meantime, is praying over her until she finally comes to, and they tell her that she has been out for 8 hours. The research team was headed by John Zaffis, who is the Warrens' nephew. He also lived in the house for 9.5 weeks in the summer of 1988 to gather evidence. And his most famous encounter from the investigation, again, in some reports, this happened at the same time as Carmen going into the trance-like state, and other times it happened while everyone was sleeping, so I don't. Either way, and this is the part of the 2002 documentary that traumatized me as a 10-year-old.
Okay.
So he said he stepped away from the group and felt everything go cold. He said he calls for help, but no one can hear him. He turns and he sees the man with dark hair on the stairs. He said it was transparent and murky, and it stunk like hell. It slowly walks down the stairs, and when it reaches the bottom, it makes eye contact with him and says, "Do you know what they did to us?"
Ew.
So Zaffis left the house for 3 days. In the 2002 documentary, sorry I keep bringing this up, but the man, and the casting for this was great because the dude playing the man with the black hair was really creepy, but the man like is walking up the basement stairs towards Zaffis, and then his face just starts morphing, and then he turns into a fireball and launches himself at the investigator. Which I don't know why the filmmakers were just like, I know how to make this better. Fire. But it worked on me as a child because I didn't like it. But not doing so great on the documentary title in that one. So they send their evidence to the Catholic Church, who's skeptical, but they send a local representative to the home. He reports back to the church, and they are granted an exorcism. During the exorcism, family members are attacked. Tammy recounts being lifted off the ground and choked. Everyone is told to just ignore the provocations. Finally, the exorcism works, and everyone describes the house getting brighter and warmer, like light is suddenly let in. So this is when all the activity stops, but the family still chooses to move out after the exorcism, and they've had no more paranormal experiences. That's the story.
Wait, do we know anything after that? Do we know, like, between Philip and Tammy, do you even still reconcile a relationship even if it was
no.
demon possession? Like,
I assume no. And this is where you start poking holes in this whole story, and it kind of unravels because there are a lot of theories as to what really happened because, of course, so the mother, Carmen, is the one who has been most vocal and done the most interviews to get this story out there.
Okay.
No one else in the family has really come forward. Like, the kids don't really have anything to say about it. Carmen is actually going by her maiden name in interviews because she doesn't want her children or grandchildren to be approached by this.
Okay.
So this story was popularized in 1992 by author Ray Garton, who was approached by the Warrens and the Snedekers to write In a Dark Place, the story of a true haunting. Ray Garton has since said that this was the lowest point of his career.
Oh.
Burn.
Oh.
So he has tried to distance himself from the story as much as he possibly can. He says the family involved, which was going through some serious problems like alcoholism and drug addiction, could not keep their story straight. I had become very frustrated. It's hard writing a nonfiction book when all the people involved are telling you different stories. The Warrens also claimed to him that they had video evidence from the home of the haunting, and when he asked to see it, they never showed it to him. Garton says that he approached Ed Warren about his difficulties writing the book, and Ed told him to use what he could from the interviews. According to Garton, he said, "Oh, they're crazy. All the people who come to us are crazy. You think sane people would come to us? Just use what works and make the rest up. Just make it up and make it scary."
Wait, Warren said that?
According to Ray Garton, this is what Ed Warren said to him. The Warrens and Garton kind of sniped at each other a little bit in the media. In the following years. Both the Warrens have since passed, and since then, more and more has come out about them. They are controversial and problematic figures.
Well, go ahead and give me an example. What's something that's come out about them?
It gets a little true crimey, so I don't want to. If we're gonna go into that, I want to do it right.
Okay.
I mean, it's stuff like this where more and more stuff is coming out about them just making stuff up.
Okay.
All the neighbors dispute this, saying that they never saw any evidence of a haunting. And the show from the 80s that I mentioned earlier, the audience was the neighbors. Like, it was a whole big, like, on-air fight that they had between the Snedekers and the neighbors and Ed and Lorraine Warren, where they all just sat and argued about whether or not this was actually haunted, about whether or not this was all just a play to get money or to get out on rent, because all the neighbors are like, no, you knew this was a funeral home going in. You can't say that it wasn't. Everyone was like, there was a sign that there was a funeral home. But then the Snedekers say, well, the sign was covered in plywood. So it just becomes this huge game of, like, he said, she said. Everyone wants the other person to be the bad guy in this story.
But the Snedeker is actually their last name, though, right? Or is that their maiden name?
Carmen goes by Carmen Reed now.
Okay.
But yes, they are the Snedekers.
But then there must be any kind of public record if an arrest was made with Philip. He would have been a minor. He would have been a minor,
so I don't know.
Okay.
Not that I have seen. I will say that they tried to find a record of a funeral home employee who was practicing necromancy. And again, they never found any evidence to corroborate that. Also, a representative of the Hartford Archdiocese says that no authorized exorcism ever took place in that home. And according to the current owners of the home, the house is not haunted. It's Hollywood foolishness. What I find to be a very compelling theory, and again, allegedly, the family has told this story either to make money because they were so in debt, because again, cancer is fucking expensive.
Yeah.
Or their child did something horrible to their niece and they tried to take the blame from him and put it on an outside force. There is no way to know what the truth is here. Because again, the truth varies depending on who tells it. The truth to Carmen is one thing. The truth to her neighbors is something else. The truth to the Warrens seemed to be different from the truth of the Snedekers, according to the truth of Ray Garton. It gets complicated. Again, none of the other children in the home want to say anything publicly about it. Philip was released from the hospital and never talked about this. He did go on to, he actually lived in Tennessee and had 4 children. He worked as a trucker, but unfortunately his cancer did come back in 2012 and he passed away.
Okay.
It's just a really, no matter how you tell it, it's a very sad and upsetting story with no discernible truth to it. But we talked about in the last episode how there's that one element of truth that just snowballs. So one thing in this is true. At least one thing in this is true.
Yeah.
But it is impossible to actually definitively say what that is. I'm sorry, that is the very long-winded tale of the Snedeker haunting. I'm sorry, I just talked forever.
Somehow the horror in that is the very real horror of what happens in America when someone gets sick, and this country is so survival of the fittest that immediately it becomes like a struggle for survival.
Medical bills can be just as scary, if not scarier. But then also, it's how mental illness gets treated, and allegedly, if there was an attack on the niece, how that would have been completely discarded and reframed to save the offender.
Yeah.
Instead of protecting her.
Yeah.
I didn't know everything about that case that I learned, and it is far more upsetting than I realized. I regret it because it was a lot. But I hope yeah.
So there were a few interesting bits that kind of match certain things that come up with what that I was looking into.
That's surprising.
Yeah.
I didn't expect to have any crossover with you today.
Actually, yeah, in a couple places, there's some thematic crossover. I didn't want to just do a history of Connecticut.
You're saying history of Connecticut?
An history of
An
Connecticut.
history, okay.
So now, instead, I wanted to look at the way that we assign credibility to certain stories based on how that they fit our preconceived notions of what a horror story should be.
Huh, okay.
And I think that's kind of one of the first interesting crossovers a little bit, because since the Snedekers lived in a funeral home, immediately they gain credibility to their story, which would not have happened if they lived in a new build construction in some suburban tract housing. So we're talking about New England, though, and New England has a reputation for being the haunted part of the country.
That's what you get when you kill all the witches.
I say that, but does that kind of match with how you understand it? Actually,
I don't know. I don't...
come to think of it, you might say something different because of experiences that you and I have had, but I do hear a lot of stories about hauntings that happen in New England.
Yeah, a lot comes out of that part. I know there's like, the Salem witch trials and Bridgewater Triangle and yeah, there is a lot going on up there.
Mm-hmm. So I decided to look up what the most haunted places were in America. That was where I actually started out this topic for this week, and I found a few interesting graphics that we can probably try to upload. But here's the first one that I found, and it's just the number of ghost sightings by state. You'll notice in this map, New England is fairly low on the list, right? According to this map, the most haunted state in the U.S. is California, followed by Texas.
It's a population thing?
That was what immediately crossed my mind. I thought, well, California and Texas have the most people, and, Connecticut has a much smaller population than Texas, even though it's much more densely populated. So obviously it's going to have a much smaller number of reported ghost sightings. I took a look again at the most and least haunted states from some other sources. This next one I found seemed to indicate some of the Rust Belt states. Oddly enough, North Dakota was thrown in there. The state of Utah, Nevada, California was thrown in there.
Are these just based off of ghost sightings, or are they like cryptid sightings, or is it just unexplained phenomenon?
These seem to be based off of ghost sightings,
okay,
from what I can tell. Here's another one, and it just shows the most haunted sites in America. And again, you see there seems to be some clustering around San Francisco and Los Angeles.
There are no hauntings in Arizona.
On this map, no.
Or Utah, the ghosts don't go there.
And then there's a few up in the Northeast. A lot seem to be centered around Chicago and Illinois and Indiana.
And Bigfoot has Washington cornered.
There's some questionable methodology going on.
Yeah, because I don't know how you scientifically prove it. It's just, again, just like word of mouth.
Mm-hmm. Here's another one that's just kind of showing a heat map. Again, here's San Francisco and Los Angeles on the West Coast showing up, a whole bunch of nothing in the middle of the country. And then what do you know? The corridor between Washington and Boston along there is shown as the highest on the East Coast, which makes sense because that's also the most densely populated part of the country between...
Yeah, but this map, it looks suspiciously similar to like a population map.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, how do we know which ghost sightings or paranormal activities were reported?
Yeah.
Some people based on their cultural background, may or may not be more or less likely to report things. This made me think of, it's a bit of a tangent, but there's a picture of a world map which is claiming to show the safest and least safe countries in the world for women based on number of reported assault cases. and it shows the United Kingdom is just like leading the way in number of reported assaults for women. But then you have to think about it. This
Unreported cases.
Unreported cases.
Yeah, there's a huge amount of unreported cases.
I'm not saying that violence against women doesn't happen in the United Kingdom. Clearly, it's a problem there because it's a problem everywhere on Earth.
But again, it's a very unreported crime, so it's hard to say that this.
Yeah.
Again, it just
It was just interesting that popped up and when I was looking up hauntings.
That showed up under ghost sighting, like when you were minding your own business googling ghost sightings, that showed up.
I was scrolling deep in Google and that eventually popped up, and it kind of seemed to go with reported cases. Just means that it just means reported cases. Another few maps that I found, and they were showing ley lines across the United States. You know what ley lines are, right?
Yeah, they're those lines where they're just like the most activity and like maybe I don't, but it's a paranormal thing and it's a line.
Yeah, so it was theorized that early inhabitants of Neolithic England were creating straight roads across the country to link up sacred sites. And then this got expanded to the entire world, but then people who were looking critically at it thought, well, what if we just take a random assortment of lines, just plop them down, and it turns out a random assortment of lines will do just as good of linking up certain sites on Earth.
Okay.
As I was looking up sites for ley lines, you'll see here that they're all different. Even within the people making these ley line maps, these ley lines don't match.
Oh, these are all ley lines. Mm-hmm. Oh, there's no rhyme or reason to this. This is chaos.
No, in two of them you can see that there seems to be a certain focus on the Bermuda Triangle that doesn't exist in this other globe map, and frankly, they could do just as accurate of a map by making longitudinal and latitude lines across the globe.
Okay.
I'm sure each one of these will claim to be the most authentic, but it doesn't. They don't match within each other.
You can't prove or disprove any of it, so one is just as true as the other.
Also, you'll notice on these maps that there doesn't seem to be any particular concentration of lines in the New England region. There's the odd line that goes through there, but there are no major intersections that you can specifically point out. So that basically just leaves the people who have, written about ghost stories in the New England region to look at for why this area supposedly has so many hauntings. Obviously, there's Irving, Legend of Spooky Hollow, which everyone that was made up. There's good old Edgar Allan Poe. Do you remember the other week we were having a discussion about something from Boston, and you mentioned Edgar Allan Poe being from Boston?
I saw a TikTok and someone was like, I saw Edgar Allan Poe was from Boston, so then she started just reading his poems in a Boston accent, and I thought it was funny, and I told you about it. That's all. That's the story.
But you said that to me, and I looked at you disbelievingly and said he was from Baltimore. But Edgar Allan Poe apparently was born in Boston and lived there for a year. His father left, his mother died, and then he got sent to Richmond. Or he was born Edgar Poe. He got sent to Richmond to grow up under the care of a man with the last name Allen, which is why I took the name Edgar Allan Poe.
Okay.
And he was there for some time until he dropped out of college and started writing. But he did eventually die in Baltimore.
Okay.
He has strange relationships with women. He married his cousin.
Yeah.
Okay. She died of tuberculosis while they were living in Long Island. He had a couple affairs.
While he was married to his cousin?
Yes, he had one affair and then a few affairs after she died.
Are they affairs then? Were they married? He had relationships.
He had relationships.
I don't know.
Wikipedia called them affairs.
Okay. I was like, this is awful. She's dying of tuberculosis and you're sleeping around? Okay.
He did with one person, and then apparently there's a story where that another woman fancied him and he turned her down. So she got upset and claimed that there were letters between them that were then not produced. So then this woman's brother said he was going to duel Edgar Allan Poe because, that's just what you did at the time.
Men
I
are
guess.
just always like, meet me outside.
But yeah, I think the next big one you run into then from the area, you've got H.P. Lovecraft, who was born in Rhode Island. Although he's famous now, he was poor and not famous at all during his life. He was a very unsuccessful writer. He was inspired by Edgar Allan Poe. He was also a white supremacist. He wrote stories that he called cosmic horror, which I guess could also be called existential horror. And when you read his stories, knowing this about him, sometimes you can read certain undertones that were just things that he wasn't going to write.
Ew.
So H.P. Lovecraft often wrote stories about people being overpowered by fanatical cults or foreign gods and losing their minds as a result, and this can kind of be read when you know his line of thinking. This can kind of be read as a metaphor for Anglo-Saxon culture getting overrun by other people in the United States.
Do we have a source on him being a white supremacist?
Yes.
Okay.
Things that he wrote himself.
Okay, cool, excellent. Straight from the source. Great.
Yeah,
okay.
he lived in New York City for a time and wrote letters he was very upset about the number of immigrants that lived in New York City.
I like it when they tell on themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, this isn't someone else. No, he...
Okay. So this is not speculation. This is... Okay.
No, but also he lived in the early part of the 20th century when just people would the president, Wilson, was out as a white supremacist at the time. Like, it was just, they had no shame about it. But jumping ahead to modern times, you got Stephen King.
I know that guy.
You know that guy.
I mean, not in person. I just...
know of him.
He exists.
It's kind of popular nowadays to rat on the guy. But it's also hard to deny the influence that he's had on popular culture. So both Lovecraft and Stephen King kind of invented their own little fictional New England. Lovecraft's was fairly in-depth, so in some ways that was a little ahead of his time. So I can name some prominent fiction writers, authors from the region, and that probably has a little something to do with it, but also fiction writers come from everywhere. Mm-hmm. If we were to just look at the number of horror writers, it should look like a population density map like we were looking at earlier, and we should be seeing the same thing. So that still doesn't really explain the association between New England and being haunted.
That's funny because Stephen King's big break came from staying in a hotel where he got the inspiration for The Shining, which was in Colorado, I think.
Yeah.
It wasn't even in New England.
Yeah. Man, I haven't seen that movie in ages.
I've never seen The Shining.
I haven't seen that movie in so long.
I should probably at some point in my life see The Shining, but I have an unpopular hang-up with Stanley Kubrick, so... But yeah, I mean, a lot of his works feature... The stuff that I have seen from him features New England and it being all picturesque and foggy and...
Mm-hmm. So, there are the witch trials history, which you mentioned. I don't know, how do you feel about that as an explanation? I'm going to get a little more into that later, but...
As the witch trials for an explanation of why New England has such a quote-unquote haunted legacy.
Yeah.
I feel like that is one element of many. I suppose also a lot of people consider it... I hear when people talk about that area, they're like, oh, it has so much history and it's so old and it's been there so long. Mm-hmm. The longer people have been there, the more haunted it's going to be, which by that just the whole planet should be really haunted.
So it's cool that you said that because that was the main reason that I was going to give. That is the next point that I had listed in my notes. I wrote for myself in quotes, old aesthetic.
The old aesthetic.
So, as we discussed in previous episodes, the destruction of indigenous built sites across the United States territories has kind of given rise to the idea in popular culture that New England is somehow the oldest part of the country. And to be fair, if you go there, you will find a fair share of old buildings and old cemeteries and old stuff. But assuming that we're even just talking about Europeans, that we're not even talking about indigenous people here, assuming that we're just talking about Europeans, it ignores the fact that the Spanish were here first in Florida, or that the English had actually set up the lost colony, the Roanoke colony in North Carolina, and the Jamestown colony before New England, that the French and the Dutch and the Swedish were all here too at the same time. Go back even further, it's quite likely that the Norse made it down from Canada into New England as well. So this narrative also about New England being the oldest part of the country is just kind of one that got made up. It doesn't really have any historical truth, and the people who push that narrative, they weren't interested in historical truth. I think that they were interested in creating a foundational myth for the United States because they thought it was a young country and didn't have enough history, and they wanted a way to justify the disproportionate amount of power that Protestant Anglo-Saxons had in the government at the time. It makes sense to push the origin story of America being the Pilgrims in Plymouth Colony.
Okay. Yeah.
In other ways, too, they talk about the first battles for American independence being fought at Lexington and Concord, and they leave out other events like the Regulator movement that was happening in the American South, and they leave out a lot of other points so they can tell a story that justifies a certain culture that became dominant in America. New England was quite densely populated at a very formational time, though, in United States history. In the late 18th and early 19th centuries, when America was building a national identity, so to speak, that area was the most densely populated. One of the things that did differentiate the Puritans, the Pilgrims in New England from other parts of the country, though, was their religious zeal. Interestingly enough, at the time, non-religion was much more common in the south of the United States, which is interesting because now the north is much more secular and the south is much more religious. Mm-hmm. But up until you had the Great Awakenings, the south was the more secular part of the country. Think like Thomas Jefferson he didn't believe that in the resurrection, for example. Like, that's why that he rewrote his own version of the Bible, where that it was just Jesus' sayings, but he took out all the miracle story parts because he didn't think that Jesus died and rose again.
All of that was news to me. Everything you just said was news to me. What? You just rewrote the Bible?
Yeah.
That dude was so weird.
Yeah, Jefferson rewrote the Bible.
What a time.
He
didn't have anything better to do?
Yeah, besides writing the Declaration of Independence, he also wrote a new version of the Christian gospel story where Jesus just walked around and said sayings and was a wise teacher, but did not perform miracles and was not reresurrected because Jefferson didn't believe in the resurrection.
And he just needed... Okay. All right. Okay.
Yeah, because he was a deist. And this goes against...
I know a lot of people who have a lot of problems with the Bible, and I have not known a single one of them to rewrite it.
It's quite funny because a lot of... You're always given a narrative about how Christian men...
Yeah, they were such godly men molding the country and the vision of God. He's just over there rewriting the Bible.
Yeah, no. Yeah,
okay.
Jefferson... Yeah, Jefferson did not believe the resurrection.
Okay.
He thought there might have been a historical Jesus, but he thought that historical Jesus was just a rabbi who ran around saying troublesome things and got executed.
Okay. All right.
But that view was actually quite common in the South at the time. The South was far more secular than the Northeast.
I just can't get over how time-consuming rewriting the Bible would be. Like, it's so long. It's so long.
Well, so it wasn't the whole thing.
Okay.
It was just he rewrote a gospel story.
Okay.
So think Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. This was just the Gospel of Thomas Jefferson.
All right.
But yeah, so let's talk about the Puritans. We'll go back 100 years and back into the 17th century and talk about their mindset. For starts, frankly, if they came to today's world, they would not like modern America much at all. Even some of the more devout right-wing groups in America, I'm pretty sure the Puritans would not like.
Why is that woman wearing shorts?
Yeah, why is her head uncovered? Why are they Why are they laughing right now? Why are they celebrating Christmas?
Dare they show those elbows?
The fact that the Puritans were religious extremists is well understood. I don't need to harp on it too much. I think this is just general knowledge, except for people who live in fantasy history land, and they're not going to be listening to me talking anyway. They heard something I said earlier and have already tuned away. They were violent fundamentalists. The Puritans had overthrown the government in England and established a military dictatorship under Cromwell that, like I said, banned dancing and Christmas and vandalized cultural sites that displayed human faces because they thought it was idolatry. So yeah, they were kind of like Islamic State or the Taliban. They didn't like women. But also, to be fair, it's not like the people who they were fighting against, it's not like the royalists were actually that much better at the time. Consider the Anglican Church, which they were fighting against, had been founded by Henry VIII, who was, a murderous misogynist tyrant who had also ordered the dissolution of the monastery. So he'd also destroyed religious sites in his time 100 years prior. So there's not a lot of good guys at this point in time. But the Puritans of Plymouth Colony that came over on the Mayflower were actually not the same ones that were involved in the English Civil War. They had actually come over earlier. The English Civil War happened several decades after that they had come over on the boat. They didn't call themselves pilgrims, they didn't call themselves Puritans, they called themselves saints.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they called themselves the saints.
Did that mean to them what it means to me? Because that's a weird complex.
Well, they thought that by being separatist and breaking away with the Anglican Church, they thought they were reestablishing the original church from right after when Jesus was resurrected. The one that's talked about in Acts, they thought they were reviving that church. They, of course, didn't know anything about farming on the new continent. Roughly half of them died within the first year. And in the mindset of these people, because they were highly religious, they were obsessed with the devil.
Okay.
Like, you could argue that they were possibly even more obsessed with the devil than they were obsessed with Jesus.
That's awkward.
They thought the devil was everywhere. Obviously, they thought that dancing and merriment in general was the devil, as well as Christmas. They thought that was the devil too. But they also thought the land that they just landed in was ruled by the devil. They thought that the people who lived there were devil worshippers who had been tricked into false religion. This was why that they thought there was such a high mortality rate. It wasn't because that they were in a foreign land and completely clueless about how to survive there. It's because the devil.
Okay, so they spent more time fearing the devil than they did worshiping their god.
Sometimes it seems that way. Sometimes it seems like that would not be an inaccurate way to describe their religious worldview. They were actually so obsessed with blaming the devil for everything that, for example, in the year 1660, a man named Jeremiah Burroughs drowned.
Oh.
And it was determined that his canoe had been possessed by the devil in the inquiry afterwards. So,
what?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah, they...
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
honey.
Yeah.
Oh, dear.
And they also, thought that the devil lived among their own, which explains the frequent conflicts that existed between Puritans and the Anglican or secular settlers in the region. So they weren't just fighting indigenous people, they were also fighting each other's in various conflicts.
They were not equipped for this. They were just mentally not ready. They had things to work out.
No, I guess they had very high hopes that they were just going to show up and miracles were going to happen, and when they actually had to survive with the help of indigenous people who took pity on them,
They were just like, look at these poor people over there. They think this canoe got possessed. Like, they're clearly not okay. They're like these idiots.
So Plymouth Colony actually mandated church attendance while also only allowing religious believers and converts to attend. But Plymouth Colony was actually the more open-minded one, because you didn't actually really have to do that much. You could just say, yeah, sure, I believe, and show up at church, and they were okay.
You didn't have to name like 3 people who had been possessed by the devil?
No, the Massachusetts Bay Colony was actually far more religiously extreme even than the Plymouth Colony. And the Massachusetts Bay Colony is, of course, where the Salem witch trials took place. The Pilgrims, or the Saints they call themselves, relied on the Bible as their primary legal document.
Great. Good times.
Interesting.
Did Thomas Jefferson write it?
Interesting side note. Because there is no reference anywhere in the Bible to a minister performing a marriage ceremony, they thought all marriage ceremonies were just civil ceremonies, and they did not actually have religious marriage ceremonies in their community. They just thought it was a matter of the state, but they didn't regard it as something that needed to be performed by a minister. It was just an agreement between families.
Okay. I mean, they're not wrong.
No, I mean, that's true.
That's pretty sound.
Everything
else they're doing is like, claiming a canoe was possessed by the devil, and so Jeremiah drowned. But like that one seems solid. Like, I'll give them that.
Anyway, I'm getting a little sidetracked here.
By the canoe?
But yeah. But let's talk about how that, their obsession with the supernatural is what I think probably shaped the cultural idea.
Completely forgot we were talking about the supernatural in New England.
Yes. So the woods outside of settlements were, of course, dangerous for the colonists, also for the locals who lived there. The colonists were frequently on bad terms with the locals. There was the Pequot War in 1637 and King Philip's War in 1675. They weren't wars like we think of as being wars. They were ethnic conflicts. They were more like gang wars. There wasn't really a proper organized army on either side.
Okay.
These were...
So like citizens, militias, just...
Yeah, just going out and shooting each other. It was more like a gangland war than it was like a actual armed conflict between two states.
Okay.
There wasn't a centralized government in the area at the time. There were governors who were put in place, but they had limited authority from time to time. In fact, the governor who was installed just before the Glorious Revolution back in England got executed. So it was...
Everyone is so dramatic.
Yeah, law and order didn't really... New England was more like how we imagine the Wild West to have been than the Wild West actually ever was.
Oh, fun. Okay.
Yeah, during the early colonial times, I would argue was far more lawless and far bloodier than the so-called Wild West ever was. These conflicts with indigenous people usually arose because there were underhanded deals, or the colonists were using armed coercion to force sale of land, and this concept even of itself didn't properly translate well. I would say this is where the idea of New England getting haunted came from, because... like you were saying in your story, there's always some kernel of truth that exists somewhere. And there's the cultural motif of the woods, the wilderness of New England, the woods just outside of town being haunted. Mm-hmm. I could list 100 references.
Yeah.
That's the theme. That was something that was real at the time. But because the Puritans saw the devil in everything, everywhere they looked, they saw the devil, it then became a supernatural entity that was causing this violence. It wasn't bad relations with the locals. It wasn't mismanagement of land with farming that was causing them to have famine. It was the devil. And
meanwhile, the guy who just like did not build that canoe properly is just over there, just like it was the devil. It's not that I just totally forgot to put the hull in the canoe. Do canoes have hulls?
I hope not.
Is that not just the bottom of the canoe?
Oh, I see what you mean. I thought you meant like a hole going through
No, I
the
meant like
canoe
a hull,
into
like the hull of a ship.
Oh, Hull.
Yes.
I mean,
I don't know if that's just for big ships.
I think that's just big ships. I think a canoe just has a dugout area.
Anyways, he forgot to put the bottom of the canoe in. He was just like, the devil. The devil did it. Again, we just kind of have a theme of shirking responsibility for your group's actions.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
And just blaming supernatural forces rather than coming to terms with your own failures.
Yeah. And when you consider that Plymouth Colony was founded nearly 200 years before the Declaration of Independence, when you consider the amount of time that these ideas had to stew before there was a national identity that was created, but then once a national identity was created, this became foundational mythology.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for several hundred years, everyone's just been like, well, the devil is in this land, the devil is in the woods.
Yeah.
Okay.
And sometimes I kind of wonder, could it have happened the other way? Suppose if instead of the English having been the ones to colonize North America from east to west, say the Spanish had continued to move up from south to north. Sometimes I wonder if we would consider the woods to be a place of fear and haunting the same way. Could it have been, say, the desert in the American Southwest? Could that have been considered haunted? Because there are some things about woods, you don't have great line of sight, but other than that, there's nothing, when you think about it, that should say that woods would be haunted, other than the fact that at the time that these cultural ideas were getting started, they were in a wooded area, and the woods outside of their local village was the place where people who were very angry at you were living. But again, I'd like to point out that even though there were ethnic cleansings in New England, bad things were happening, it's not like an excess of bad things were happening in New England compared to the rest of the colonies. In Virginia, there was the first Anglo-Powhatan War in 1610, which was 10 years before the Mayflower. That was an ethnic cleansing happened. Lord Delaware was brought over to engage in basically the same tactics. He had sacked villages. It wasn't two armies meeting on a field of battle. It was attacking and killing women and children. Delaware's named after him. You know that.
Do now. Awkward.
And in North Carolina, there was the Tuscarora War in the early 18th century. You remember that from North Carolina history class?
No, we didn't talk about wars. We talked about the state bird.
Oh. Yeah, so in the early 18th century, the Tuscarora War happened in eastern North Carolina, and it was a similar thing. You had the Tuscarora there, and Iroquoian tribe who were living in the area. Colonists were encroaching on their land, and there was a fight, and obviously the native peoples lost. So this might be kind of controversial for me to say, but I'd argue that even the Salem witch trials were a relatively small event.
Just in general?
Yeah, I mean, of course, yeah, there was 20 executions in North America, but during like the height of witch trials in Europe, there are estimates all over the place, but most of them seem to land on somewhere around 50,000 people were executed. About 3/4 of them were women.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very famous American story, but it's not in the grand scheme of witch trials. No, it's just like our local lore.
The main issue I have with the cultural focus on it is there was an entire ethnic cleansing happening in the country at the time. There was also slavery, and for indigenous and enslaved women, they legally had no right over their bodies. And yet, for some reason, when the oppression of women in early America gets brought up, it's always Salem witch trials. And it's very bad that 20 women were executed. Actually, no, it was John Proctor. He was a man. That is very bad, but it highlights the suffering of white English women above all the others. And that's the problem I have with the way that the narrative is told.
Yeah.
It's always told, look how horrible these colonists were to the women in their communities. Yes, they were horrible to the women in their communities, but they were also horrible on a much larger scale. If we want to cycle back to Thomas Jefferson again, who had content warning,
Yeah.
who, as a middle-aged man, had a 14-year-old slave girl, which was not uncommon at the time. In fact, Sally Hemings was biologically Thomas Jefferson's sister-in-law.
I don't think I knew that.
Thomas Jefferson gained possession of Sally Hemings when that he married his wife. Sally Hemings is the biologic child of Thomas Jefferson's stepfather.
What?
And the thing is, that story is not even that uncommon. It happens to involve someone who was foundational establishing the new government. But the problem I have with the Salem witch trials story is that it seems to elevate the suffering of white English women above the rampant abuse that was happening across the entire region at the time.
Yeah, because when that story gets told, there's never any mention of any other group living in that area or of anything else happening other than the Salem witch trials.
I think that particular story highlights how that we as a culture are more receptive to some stories than others.
Okay, yeah.
How much more receptive that we are to believe and listen to and value certain people's stories because they benefit a certain way that we were already seeing the world, and they solidify that mindset. When you look at stories from New England, stories like The Haunting in Connecticut that you just told me, the Amityville Horror House, we accept these stories more readily because they fit our preconceived notions. And while I do think it's important to listen to people with an open mind, you have to accept that whether or not you're conscious of it at the time, your own biases are influencing how that these stories are received and how that our own mind is trying to validate a personal narrative as well. And that will always kind of cloud the vision of reality that we create in our heads.
That's a very powerful sentiment.
So, yeah, that was kind of rambling in some places. That's kind of how I tried to loop it together, though.
No, I thought that was good. I thought that was a good way to tie all of that together. I don't know what to say now, because yeah, that was very powerful.
Okay. I think there are definitely going to be some people who are going to... I'm not sure how this is going to land. When you tell history as a story, it's impossible to tell it in a fully neutral way. There's no way to be completely unbiased because stories always, with the way that our language is framed, they always have a central character. And by character, I mean like a group of people or a movement or an idea or a culture. It doesn't necessarily have to be a single individual. But there's always, like in a subject of a sentence, there's a subject of a story that you're forced to identify with. Stories about New England, we accept them because they fit a cultural framework and way of understanding history that we were taught that may not necessarily be accurate.
That kind of does fit into another theory that I didn't go into with the Snedeker case about how they saw the publicity from the Amityville case and use that preconceived framework to try and replicate it to then bring attention to their case. So that's interesting, like using those preconceived ideas to fit an existing narrative, making it easier to sell a similar story. This episode was a lot.
It went long.
It's really long. Sorry. Didn't mean to talk forever. Also, I didn't mean for it to be so heavy. We've only gone 4 episodes and we've been a lot heavier than I thought they were going to be. This has gone on much longer than we had anticipated for this episode, so maybe we should...
Yes.
Until the next one?
because I thought a lot about what to say before I started. I didn't think of what to say about after, and that's why I've just been staring at you in silence after I gave my last sentence.
I didn't want to, like, end this very, very powerful, poignant note about how we discuss history by just going like, and so anyways, that's nice.
I'm sorry.
So I was just staring back at you.
Oh no.
It's okay. We will cut that part out, because that'll be boring.
In my head, as I was saying it, I was like, am I just going to cut this out later? Am I just going to cut this out in the final edits and just...
Will he? Won't he? Stick around and find out. I don't know where
they would find out by the time they were listening.
I don't know why my voice is doing this.
Oh dear.
This is the after midnight. Now the weird voice effects are gonna come on in, and I'm just gonna start talking like a dramatic announceress. All right, so we have one more episode left in October 2021.
Do you want to state it, or do you want it to be a surprise?
It's sleep paralysis. We're talking about sleep paralysis. Spoiler alert, it's mostly going to be made up of personal stories. Our personal stories, unfortunately.
And maybe my part of it can stay relatively clear of genocide and violence against women, and can stay relatively... hopefully.
Anything's possible at this point, because it seems like that is just all history is just horrific violence. Okay, this has gone on a while. Okay. And our cat clearly wants attention, so I think these were important topics we covered. I'm sorry if they were very, very heavy. Next week should be more on the lighter, creepy Halloween, spooky ghost story side of things.
Yes.
In the meantime, you can get in contact with us by email at SpookiStoryPodcast@gmail.com, Spooky Story Podcast on Instagram, Spooky Story Pod on Twitter, Spooky Story Podcast on TikTok, and Spooky Story Podcast on Facebook. Come hang out with us. We're fun, I think, sometimes a little bit. Email us your ghost stories.
And let us know what you think. I know that I have covered a fair number of quite controversial topics. If you have anything to contribute, any perspective that you think that was missed out on, let me know. And I do plan to include those in future episodes at a later date, because right now it's only my voice happening, and I think it's important that history is a communal discussion. It's not just about what I have to say, it's also about how that interacts with other people's views on past events and how they affect us today. History is a very current thing. It's not something from the past. It's something that we live with every day.
You're on a roll tonight. Okay. We've been sitting here for 2.5 hours now. Hopefully you haven't. Hopefully we edited this down to be shorter.
Thanks for sticking around.
Thank you very much for tuning in. We will see you next week. We did not say our names once this entire episode. We'll tell you what our names are next time. Thank you and good night.
Good night.
Oh.